The man stepped into the restaurant, his presence barely noticed by the staff bustling around the luxury dining hall. The place was elegant, polished floors, golden chandeliers, and neatly dressed waiters carrying silver trays. It was the kind of place where the wealthy dined, where every guest was treated like royalty. Or so it seemed. Dressed in a plain, slightly worn-out jacket, the man didn't fit the usual clientele. He walked up to the host stand, where a young waiter glanced at him uncertainly. Before the waiter could say anything, a sharp voice cut through the air. "What do you want?" The manager, a tall, well-dressed man, stepped forward with a smug expression. His eyes scanned the visitor from head to toe, lingering on his simple attire. The man didn't react. He spoke in a calm, polite tone. "I'd like a table, please." The manager scoffed. "We're fully booked." The restaurant was half empty. Several empty tables sat waiting to be filled, their pristine white tablecloths untouched. The man glanced at them but said nothing. "I can wait," he replied simply. The manager narrowed his eyes. "I don't think you understand. This isn't the kind of place for people like you." His voice dripped with condescension, his smirk growing wider. For a moment, there was silence. A few waiters exchanged uneasy glances, but no one spoke up. They had seen this happen before. The man didn't argue. He didn't plead or demand. He simply gave the manager a long, unreadable look, then turned and walked toward the exit. As he reached the door, he paused for just a second, just enough for the manager to see the slight smirk on his lips. Then, without another word, he stepped out into the night. The moment he was gone, the manager let out a low chuckle, shaking his head. Some people just don't belong in places like this. The staff went back to work. The guests continued eating, unaware of what had just happened. But they had no idea. Because the man who had just walked out? He wasn't just some random customer. And soon, everyone in that restaurant was going to find out exactly who he was. The next morning, the restaurant buzzed with its usual routine. Waiters polished silverware, chefs prepped ingredients, and the manager strutted around, barking orders. His voice echoed through the dining hall, sharp and impatient. "Move faster. We have high-profile clients today. No mistakes, or you'll regret it." The staff nodded, moving swiftly, afraid of his temper. But something felt off. There was tension in the air, an unspoken unease that no one could quite put their finger on. Then, the door swung open. A man in a dark suit walked in, his eyes scanning the restaurant with quiet authority. Behind him, two assistants followed, holding clipboards. He wore a name tag that sent a ripple of shock through the employees. Regional Director, Corporate Office. The restaurant rarely received corporate visits, and when they did, it was never unannounced. The manager's confident smirk faltered for just a moment before he quickly composed himself. "Ah, welcome," he greeted, forcing a smile. "We weren't expecting you today. What brings you here?" The director returned the smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "A routine inspection," he replied. "We're evaluating customer service and employee conditions. I'll need to speak to your staff." The waiters and kitchen staff exchanged nervous glances. This wasn't normal. The manager chuckled, waving a dismissive hand. "Oh, no need for that. Everything's running smoothly. No complaints here." The director's gaze didn't waver. "I'd like to hear that from them." For the first time, the manager hesitated. He turned to his employees, giving them a look that said everything, "Speak carefully." One by one, the director pulled waiters aside, asking simple questions. "How does the management treat you? Are all customers given equal service? Have there been any incidents of mistreatment?" The employees hesitated, choosing their words carefully. They were too afraid to say what they really wanted to. But the director wasn't fooled. He noticed the subtle tension in their faces, the way they avoided eye contact, the nervous glances they threw toward their manager. Something was wrong here. Then, a low voice from the back spoke up. Sometimes, people are treated based on how they look. The director turned. A junior waiter stood near the kitchen entrance, his hands trembling slightly. The manager's eyes flashed with anger, but he couldn't react, not in front of corporate. The director's expression remained unreadable. Is that so? Silence. The waiter swallowed hard but said nothing more. The director nodded, scribbling something on his clipboard. The manager forced another laugh. Oh, you know how it is. Employees love to exaggerate. This place runs perfectly fine. The director glanced at him. We'll see about that. And just like that, he left, his assistants following behind. As soon as the doors closed, the manager's fake smile dropped. His expression darkened. His voice was dangerously low as he turned to the staff. If anyone thinks they can ruin my reputation, they'd better think again. But deep inside, a sliver of doubt crept into his mind. Something about this wasn't right. Why was corporate suddenly interested in their restaurant? And why did it feel like someone was watching him? The next day, something strange happened. A new employee showed up for work. He was dressed in the restaurant's standard uniform, black slacks, a crisp white shirt, and a simple apron. He looked like any other waiter. But there was something different about him. He was quiet. Too quiet. The other staff tried to welcome him, but he only nodded in response. He barely spoke unless spoken to. He worked hard, never complained, and kept his head down. The manager barely acknowledged him at first. Another new one? Keep up, or you're out. The man just nodded. For the first few hours, he was assigned basic tasks, clearing tables, refilling drinks, sweeping floors. The other waiters whispered among themselves. He's different. He's watching everything. They weren't wrong. The new waiter noticed everything, how the manager barked orders at the staff, how he treated guests differently based on their appearance. He saw the manager's fake smile whenever wealthy customers entered, the way his face soured when someone less fortunate stepped in. And most of all, he saw the fear in the employees' eyes. They weren't just working under pressure. They were afraid. That afternoon, the restaurant got busy. A well-dressed businessman walked in, and the manager instantly turned on his charm. Sir. Welcome back. Let me get you the best table. At the same time, an elderly couple stepped inside. Their clothes were simple, but neat, their movements slow, but steady. They stood at the entrance, waiting. Waiting to be acknowledged. But the manager didn't even glance at them. Instead, he guided the businessman to a luxurious booth, offering him a complimentary drink. The elderly couple shifted uncomfortably. A few waiters glanced at them, unsure of what to do. The new waiter, standing nearby, watched it all unfold. Minutes passed. The couple finally stepped forward hesitantly. Excuse me, sir. May we have a table? The manager turned, irritation flickering across his face. Do you have a reservation? The old man smiled politely. No, but then you'll have to wait. We're fully booked. The new waiter's eyes flickered toward the half-empty restaurant. The elderly woman's face fell slightly, but she nodded. Of course, we understand. She turned to her husband. Maybe we should try somewhere else. The manager didn't even hear her. He was too busy laughing at something the businessman had said. The couple turned to leave, disappointment in their steps. But before they could step outside, please, allow me. The new waiter's voice was calm, but firm as he stepped forward. The manager turned, frowning. What do you think you're doing? The new waiter ignored him. Instead, he pulled out a chair at a nearby table, gesturing toward the elderly couple with a polite smile. Right this way, please. For a moment, there was silence. The couple hesitated, glancing between the waiter and the manager. The manager's jaw clenched, anger flashing in his eyes. But he couldn't cause a scene. Not with customers watching. Finally, the old man smiled. "Thank you, young man." They took their seats, gratitude written all over their faces. The manager said nothing. But the way he glared at the new waiter spoke volumes. Something about him was unsettling. Something about him felt dangerous. And for the first time in a long time, the manager felt something creeping into his chest. A feeling he wasn't used to. The evening rush had begun. The restaurant was filling up, and the kitchen was moving at full speed. Orders were shouted, plates clattered, and the scent of sizzling steaks filled the air. The manager, standing at his usual spot near the front, was all smiles, but only for the right customers. The wealthy, the influential, the high spenders, he treated them like royalty. He laughed at their jokes, checked on their meals personally, and ensured they received the best service. But for others? His tone was curt, his patience thin. The new waiter continued to work silently, his sharp eyes missing nothing. He saw how the manager ignored customers he deemed unworthy. How he rushed servers, berated the kitchen staff, and whispered cutting remarks to those he didn't respect. Then came the moment that changed everything. A group of high-profile businessmen entered, their suits sharp, their watches gleaming. The manager's entire demeanor shifted. "Gentlemen. What an honor. Right this way." He practically bowed as he led them to the VIP section. At the same time, another guest entered. A young woman in simple clothes, jeans, and a plain sweater. She looked around hesitantly, clutching a small purse. She approached the front desk with a soft voice. "Excuse me, do you have a table for one?" The manager barely glanced at her. "We're fully booked," he said coldly. She blinked, looking around. "But I see open, no reservations, no service," he cut her off. "Try somewhere else." The girl lowered her gaze. "Oh, okay." The new waiter saw it all. He also saw something else, the way one of the businessmen in the VIP section had turned his head, watching the exchange with keen interest. But the manager was too busy entertaining his high-paying guests to notice. Moments later, the girl walked out, shoulders hunched. The new waiter clenched his jaw. The entire scene had played out just like before, with the elderly couple, with others who had come through these doors and been turned away for nothing more than their appearance. The manager had no idea who was watching. And he had no idea how much trouble he had just invited upon himself. As the night went on, the manager's arrogance grew. He barked at the waiters, snapped at the chefs, and laughed when a busboy accidentally dropped a plate. "Pathetic," he muttered, shaking his head. The restaurant staff endured it. They always did. But the new waiter? He was just waiting. Waiting for the perfect moment. And that moment was coming. Faster than the manager could ever imagine, the night was winding down, but the tension in the restaurant was reaching its peak. The staff moved quickly, cleaning tables and preparing for closing time. The manager stood near the bar, sipping an expensive drink, one of the many perks he had given himself. Then it happened. A waiter, one of the younger ones, new to the job, accidentally bumped into a table while clearing it. A half-full glass of wine tipped over, spilling red liquid across the white tablecloth. The restaurant went silent. The manager's head snapped toward the scene, his face twisting with rage. "You idiot," he barked, storming toward the trembling waiter. "Do you have any idea how much this tablecloth costs?" I am sorry, sir. It was an accident." The manager wasn't interested in apologies. His voice grew louder, his words sharper. "You're a disgrace. You can't even handle a simple job. Maybe you don't belong here." The young waiter's hands shook as he tried to wipe up the mess. The other employees stared at their feet, afraid to intervene. And then, enough. The voice was calm but firm. All eyes turned toward the source. The new waiter stood near the kitchen entrance, his expression unreadable. The manager's eyes narrowed. "Excuse me?" "I said enough." The new waiter stepped forward, his gaze locking onto the manager's. He made a mistake. It happens. No need to humiliate him. Murmurs spread among the staff. No one had ever dared to challenge the manager before. The manager let out a low chuckle, shaking his head. Who do you think you are? This is my restaurant. My rules. The new waiter didn't flinch. And what kind of leader rules with fear? The manager's smirk faltered. His eyes darkened. You must really enjoy being the hero, huh? He sneered. But let me remind you of something, you're nothing here. You're just a low-level employee. And if you keep running your mouth, you won't even be that. The restaurant was silent. The staff held their breath. The new waiter simply stared at the manager. There was no fear in his eyes. Only quiet confidence. Then, with a slight smirk, he said 4 simple words, "We'll see about that." For the first time, the manager felt something unsettling crawl up his spine. Something about this man. Something about the way he spoke. It was like he knew something no one else did. And soon, the manager was going to find out exactly what that was. The hard way. The next morning, the restaurant was buzzing as usual, but there was something different in the air. A strange tension gripped the staff, an unspoken sense that something big was about to happen. The manager, however, remained oblivious. He strutted through the restaurant as if he owned the world, barking orders, flashing fake smiles at wealthy customers, and ignoring the worried glances from his employees. He still hadn't forgotten the previous night, the way that new waiter had dared to challenge him. He was already planning to fire him by the end of the week. But before he could, the doors swung open. And everything changed. A group of corporate executives walked in, dressed in sharp suits, their expressions unreadable. Among them was the regional director, the same man who had visited days earlier. The restaurant froze. The staff exchanged nervous glances. The waiters lowered their heads. The kitchen staff peeked from behind the counters. Even the customers sensed the shift in the atmosphere. The manager quickly straightened his posture, pasting on his most professional smile. "Ah, gentlemen. Welcome to Save It," the regional director interrupted, his tone cold. The manager's smile stiffened. "Excuse me?" The director stepped aside, and the new waiter walked forward. But he was no longer wearing an apron. He was wearing a custom-tailored suit. And the moment the staff saw him, their jaws dropped. The manager's face paled. His eyes widened in disbelief. The new waiter looked him straight in the eye and said, "It's time we talked." The silence in the restaurant was deafening. Then, one of the corporate executives cleared his throat and spoke. "Allow me to introduce the real owner of this restaurant, and the CEO of the entire company." The room exploded in gasps. The waiters. The kitchen staff. The customers. Even the wealthy guests stared in shock. The CEO? The real owner? The same man who had been serving tables, clearing dishes, watching every single move the manager made? The manager took a step back, his entire body stiff with fear. His mind raced, searching for words, for an excuse, for some way to get out of this. But he couldn't. Because he knew. It was over. The CEO's voice was calm, but it held a weight that sent a chill through the air. "I've seen enough." The entire restaurant was watching. The waiters, who had been afraid to speak. The customers, who had been ignored. The staff, who had been mistreated. The manager swallowed hard. "Sir, the CEO didn't raise his voice, but his next words sealed the manager's fate. You're fired." The words echoed through the restaurant like a final sentence. And for the first time, the manager, who had once thought he was untouchable, had nothing to say. The manager's face turned ghostly pale. His mouth opened, but no words came out. The restaurant was silent, every staff member frozen in place. The waiters who had been too scared to speak, the kitchen workers who had endured his abuse, even the customers, all of them were watching, waiting. Waiting to see justice. The CEO took a step forward, his eyes locked onto the manager. I gave you power over this restaurant, and you misused it. I trusted you to run this place with dignity, but instead, you ran it with arrogance and cruelty. The manager swallowed hard, his hands trembling. Sir, please, let me explain, the CEO didn't flinch. Explain what? That you treated customers based on their appearance? That you humiliated employees? That you created an environment where fear was more common than respect? The words hit like a hammer. The other executives stood behind the CEO, their expressions cold, their eyes filled with disappointment. They had seen enough. The manager's legs felt weak. His mind raced for an escape. Maybe he could shift the blame, maybe he could talk his way out of it, but then, a voice spoke from the back. It's all true. The staff turned. One of the waiters, the young man the manager had humiliated the night before, stepped forward. His hands were clenched into fists, his voice shaky, but strong. Everything he's saying is true. We've all seen it. We've all lived it. Another voice. He makes us feel worthless. Then another. He treats us like we don't matter. Then another. We've been afraid to speak up, until now. The floodgates opened. One by one, the staff spoke. The truth spilled out, their voices raw with years of frustration and mistreatment. The manager knew it was over. The CEO listened carefully, his face unreadable. Finally, he turned back to the manager. You could have built people up. Instead, you tore them down. You could have made this restaurant a place of respect. Instead, you made it a place of fear. And now, you will face the consequences. The manager shook his head, desperate. Please, I can change. Give me one more chance. The CEO's gaze was unwavering. You had your chances. You wasted them. A heavy silence followed. Then, the CEO turned to the regional director. Escort him out. He's done here. 2 security personnel stepped forward. The manager staggered back, shaking his head. No. No, wait. I built this place. I made this restaurant what it is. The CEO didn't even blink. No. The employees did. The customers did. And you? You only made it worse. The security guards grabbed the manager's arms. He thrashed, panicked. Wait. You can't, But his voice faded as he was dragged toward the exit. The doors slammed shut behind him. For a moment, the restaurant was completely silent. Then, the CEO turned back to the employees. His expression softened. Things are going to change. Starting today. The weight that had hung over the staff for years finally lifted. And for the first time in a long time, they felt free. The restaurant felt different. Lighter. Freer. The moment the doors shut behind the disgraced manager, a collective exhale swept through the staff. The tension that had lived in their shoulders for years finally loosened. The CEO stood in the center of it all, looking at the faces around him. Some were still stunned, others cautious, as if they couldn't believe what had just happened. Then, one of the younger waiters, a girl who had been too afraid to even look the manager in the eye before, spoke up. Is this really happening? The CEO turned toward her, giving a small nod. Yes. You're safe now. A ripple of relief spread through the room. Some employees exchanged glances, unsure if they should celebrate yet. Others let out small, shaky laughs, as if they had just woken from a bad dream. Then, the regional director stepped forward. There will be a full internal review. We'll be making some big changes. Effective immediately, wages will be reassessed, employee treatment will be improved, and, he glanced at the CEO, then back at the staff, from now on, respect will not be optional. It will be mandatory. A stunned silence followed. Then, slowly, one person started clapping. Then another. then another. Until the entire restaurant erupted into applause. Some employees wiped away tears. Others hugged each other. The ones who had endured years of mistreatment stood the tallest, their voices finally being heard. The CEO let the applause settle before he spoke again. "I need all of you to understand something." He looked around, making eye contact with each employee. "This restaurant is nothing without you. The customers may bring money, but you bring the heart. Without you, this place wouldn't exist. And that's something I will never take for granted." More applause. But this time, there was something else in their eyes: hope. For the first time in years, they weren't just working. They mattered. Then, a soft voice spoke from the entrance. The elderly couple. The same ones the manager had dismissed days ago. The old man smiled warmly. "Sir, I don't know what just happened, but if you're in charge now, we'd love to finally have that meal." The CEO's face softened. "Right this way." This time, the staff didn't hesitate. This time, no one was ignored. This time, things were finally right. The restaurant was alive with a new energy. For the first time in years, the employees smiled, not out of obligation, but because they finally felt free. The weight of fear and intimidation had been lifted, and in its place was something they had long forgotten: pride. The CEO sat at a corner table, watching the transformation unfold. The waiters moved with purpose, the chefs worked with enthusiasm, and the customers, every single one, were treated with warmth and respect. Then, the elderly couple who had been turned away before finished their meal. As they stood to leave, the old man approached the CEO's table. "Son, I don't know who you are, but tonight, you've shown us something special." His voice was steady, but his eyes held deep wisdom. "You've reminded us that true leadership isn't about power. It's about how you treat people, especially when you think no one is watching." The CEO nodded, the words resonating with him. He had built an empire, yet sitting among the workers, disguised as one of them, had taught him more about leadership than any business meeting ever had. Respect isn't demanded. It's earned. And tonight, he had seen what happens when leadership is built on fear. It rots from the inside out. The CEO stood, shaking the old man's hand. "Thank you for those words." The couple left, smiling, and as they walked out the doors, the CEO turned back to his employees. "Starting today, this restaurant will be a place of respect. A place where no customer is judged, and no employee is afraid. This isn't just about business. This is about people." The staff listened intently, and for the first time, they truly believed it. Meanwhile, across town, the former manager sat alone in a cheap diner. His fine suit was wrinkled, his confidence shattered. He had spent years looking down on others, believing he was above them. But tonight, karma had caught up with him. For the first time in his life, he was on the other side. As he looked around, he noticed how the waiters barely acknowledged him. How they smiled at wealthier customers, but ignored his presence. He clenched his jaw. For the first time, he knew exactly what it felt like to be treated as less. And it was brutal. Back at the restaurant, the CEO took one last look around. He had exposed the corruption, removed the poison, and set things right. Not just for the sake of business, but for the sake of dignity. Because at the end of the day, it wasn't money or power that defined a person. It was how they treated those who had nothing to offer them in return. And that was a lesson the former manager would never forget. Respect is a currency that never loses value. And in the end, it's the only thing that truly matters.